The Battle of Waterloo, described by the Duke of Wellington as the nearest run thing you ever saw, stands as a decisive moment that reshaped European politics. This conflict not only marked the culmination of a series of wars that ravaged the continent, but also set the stage for a new era of balance and stability. Here, the intricate maneuvers and strategic decisions of this battle will be explored, as each move held significant consequences for the future of Europe. In the early months of 1815, Europe was on edge. The continent had been shaken by over 2 decades of conflict, but with the abdication of Napoleon Bonaparte in April 1814 and his subsequent exile to the Mediterranean island of Elba, a fragile peace had begun to settle across the nations. This peace, however, was to be short-lived. In a daring escape in February 1815, Napoleon returned to France, igniting a dramatic resurgence of power known as the 100 Days. As he landed at Gulf Juan, the deposed emperor was greeted by cheering soldiers and citizens, quickly amassing an army as he marched towards Paris. By March, he had entered the capital, reclaiming his throne without firing a single shot, as the reigning King Louis XVIII fled. The return of Napoleon spurred the European powers into action. The Congress of Vienna, which had been in session since September 1814 to redraw the boundaries and politics of a post-Napoleonic Europe, quickly declared him an outlaw. In response, the Seventh Coalition was formed, uniting Britain, Prussia, Russia, Austria, and several smaller countries against him. Each of these powers began mobilizing their armies, determined to end Napoleon's rule once and for all. The strategic positioning prior to the battle was crucial. Napoleon knew he had to disrupt the Allied forces before they could consolidate. He aimed to separate the British, led by the Duke of Wellington, and the Prussians, under Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, and defeat them individually. Wellington positioned his troops along a ridge near the village of Waterloo in Belgium, creating a defensive line that stretched from the Chateau of Hogemont in the west to the farm of Papillote to the east. His choice of high ground and fortified farmhouses strengthened his defensive posture. Meanwhile, Napoleon concentrated his forces south of Wellington's line, near the town of Charleroi. His plan was marked by characteristic audacity. By moving swiftly, he hoped to wedge his army between the British and Prussians, defeating Wellington before turning to face Blücher's forces, which were still en route. As both sides prepared for what they knew would be a decisive showdown, the stage was set for one of the greatest battles in European military history, with each commander aware that the outcome could reshape the continent's political landscape for generations to come. As the battle loomed, Napoleon's army, assembled with speed and precision, numbered around 73,000 troops. This formidable force comprised his loyal veterans from various elite regiments, including the revered Imperial Guard. Notably, the army was organized into several corps, each led by experienced marshals whom Napoleon trusted implicitly. Key figures included Marshal Ney, known for his fearless leadership, and Marshal Soult, a strategic mastermind, both critical to executing Napoleon's battle plans. Opposing Napoleon, the Duke of Wellington commanded an allied army of about 68,000 men. This coalition force was a diverse amalgam that included British, Dutch, and Belgian troops, as well as smaller contingents from various German principalities. Despite its diversity and the uneven experience among its ranks, Wellington's leadership was a unifying force. His strategic acumen was evident in his choice of terrain and defensive preparations, which utilized the ridge at Waterloo to maximize his army's effectiveness. Meanwhile, Prussian Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher led a force of 50,000 troops, positioned to join Wellington's forces. Known for his relentless pursuit and aggressive tactics, Blücher's role was pivotal. His forces were crucial in the Allied strategy, planning to support Wellington by attacking Napoleon's right flank, potentially turning the tide of the battle. The strategies of these commanders reflected their distinct military doctrines and personal experiences. Napoleon sought a swift, decisive victory to disrupt the coalition before it could fully assemble. In contrast, Wellington and Blücher aimed for a drawn-out battle, exploiting their growing numerical superiority and coordination. As these experienced leaders maneuvered their forces, they set the stage for a monumental confrontation. The upcoming clash at Waterloo promised not only to determine the fate of these armies, but also to reshape the political landscape of Europe for decades to come. As dawn broke on June 18, 1815, the atmosphere was tense with the imminent conflict. Napoleon initiated the battle by ordering an artillery barrage against Wellington's forces, positioned along the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean. This preliminary bombardment was meant to soften up the Allied defenses before the main assault. As the cannonade echoed across the battlefield, Napoleon's troops prepared for their first major maneuver, a direct attack on Hougoumont Farm, a strategic point on Wellington's right flank. This diversionary attack was intended to draw reserves away from the main line, weakening the Allied center for a decisive blow. The battle at Hougoumont would prove to be a microcosm of the larger struggle, fierce, prolonged, and costly. Despite repeated French assaults, the garrison, composed of British guards, held firm, turning the farm into a deadly trap for French soldiers. The resilience of Hougoumont defenders inadvertently thwarted Napoleon's plan to quickly break Wellington's line. Meanwhile, the center of the battlefield witnessed a series of heavy infantry assaults by the French. Waves of French soldiers advanced under a hail of artillery and musket fire, targeting key points along the Allied line. The fighting was brutal and the casualties high. Notably, Le Haye-Saint, another fortified farm, became a focal point of contention. Its capture would have given Napoleon a significant advantage, providing a breach in Wellington's defenses. However, the steadfastness of the defenders, combined with logistical missteps by the French, kept it in Allied hands for much of the day. Throughout the afternoon, as the battle raged, the situation remained fluid and uncertain. Napoleon's forces achieved partial successes, capturing positions but failing to deliver a crushing blow. Wellington's line bent under pressure, but crucially did not break. Each side's resolve was tested as they awaited the arrival of the Prussian army, whose approach threatened to tip the balance of this epic confrontation. The afternoon of June 18, 1815, saw the Battle of Waterloo reach its climax as key turning points unfolded on the battlefield. The arrival of Prussian forces under Field Marshal Blucher was one such critical moment that began to tilt the scales against Napoleon. Earlier in the day, the Prussians had engaged French forces at Wavre, which delayed their arrival at Waterloo. However, by mid-afternoon, the 1st Prussian Corps had begun to arrive, exerting additional pressure on Napoleon's right flank. Reacting to the Prussian threat, Napoleon was forced to divert significant resources to stem their advance, resources that were critically needed in his main effort against Wellington's line. This diversion weakened his offensive power at a crucial juncture and allowed Wellington to stabilize his forces and prepare for continued resistance. As the Prussian forces incrementally entered the fray, they reinvigorated the Allied defense with their numbers and determination. This psychological boost to the Allies was palpable, as troops who had been holding the line against relentless French attacks now found new reserves of strength. Simultaneously, the Imperial Guard, Napoleon's elite reserve, was committed to what would become their final charge. This decision was made in desperation as Napoleon sought to break Wellington's center and force a decisive conclusion. The Guard advanced with their customary discipline and courage, attacking the Allied center at a time when the battle seemed balanced on a knife edge. However, despite their fearsome reputation, the Imperial Guard met stiff resistance. Wellington had anticipated such a move and prepared his infantry squares to repel the assault. Under intense musket and cannon fire, the Guard faltered and ultimately retreated, a sight that was unprecedented and deeply demoralizing to the rest of the French forces. The failure of the Imperial Guard's charge marked the definitive turning point of the battle. With their morale shattered and their numbers dwindling, French forces were unable to sustain their offense. The combined weight of Allied resistance and the Prussian reinforcements sealed Napoleon's fate, leading to his eventual defeat and retreat from the field. The Battle of Waterloo, concluded on June 18, 1815, marked a decisive end to Napoleon Bonaparte's rule and dramatically altered the course of European history. As the dust settled and the sounds of battle faded, the immediate aftermath saw tens of thousands of casualties on both sides, making it one of the deadliest battles of the era. Napoleon, witnessing the total collapse of his army, was forced to retreat back to Paris. His return was short-lived, facing political isolation and realizing the futility of continuing resistance. He abdicated for the second time on June 22, just 4 days after the battle. The defeat at Waterloo ended Napoleon's hopes of restoring his empire and led to his exile to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he would spend the remainder of his life. This exile was far more stringent than the previous one on Elba, ensuring he could no longer pose a threat to European stability. The consequences of Waterloo extended far beyond Napoleon's fate. The victory solidified the reputation of the Duke of Wellington, who would go on to enjoy a distinguished political career, eventually becoming the Prime Minister of Britain. Meanwhile, the Seventh Coalition moved swiftly to restore Louis XVIII to the French throne, re-establishing the Bourbon monarchy and setting the stage for a long period of relative peace in Europe, known as the Concert of Europe. This period saw the major powers of Europe, Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and later France, work together to maintain the balance of power and prevent the rise of a single dominant state. The Congress of Vienna, reconvened after Napoleon's final defeat, implemented a new European order that curtailed French expansionist ambitions and promoted a balance of power that would largely prevent major continental wars for nearly a century. The legacy of Waterloo, therefore, was profound, shaping diplomatic strategies and European borders for generations. It symbolized the end of one era and the beginning of another, characterized by diplomatic engagement rather than military confrontation. As we've seen, the Battle of Waterloo was not just a clash of armies. It was a turning point that reshaped the landscape of Europe. From the strategic maneuvers to the valiant stands and the ultimate fallout, we've journeyed through one of history's most monumental battles. In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte launched an invasion that would dramatically reshape Europe, a daring march into Russia with the largest army Europe had ever seen. This is the story of grand ambition, harsh elements, and a campaign that spiraled into disaster. At the dawn of the 19th century, Europe's landscape of power teetered on the edge of change. The Treaty of Tilsit, forged in 1807 between Napoleon Bonaparte and Tsar Alexander I, initially promised peace and mutual support against Britain. However, as the years passed, Russia chafed under the restrictions of Napoleon's continental system, which aimed to economically isolate Britain. The strains of these economic sanctions began to show. As Russian merchants grew desperate under the stifling trade conditions, Russian defiance in continuing trade with Britain not only sparked Napoleon's ire, but also highlighted the growing schism between the two empires. Viewing this as a direct challenge to his authority and a breach of their alliance, Napoleon's response was swift and decisive. By 1812, diplomatic ties had soured, prompting Napoleon to assemble an immense force aimed at bringing Russia back into line. This was not merely a military maneuver, it was a calculated statement of power, intended to secure Napoleon's dominance over Europe and punish any dissent. In preparation for his monumental campaign against Russia, Napoleon meticulously amassed the Grande Armée, one of the largest forces ever assembled in history, comprising over 600,000 men drawn from a myriad of nations under French control. This vast assembly was a testament to Napoleon's unmatched ability to mobilize and command a diverse and sprawling military coalition. Frenchmen stood shoulder to shoulder with Italians, Germans, Poles, Spaniards, and others, each contingent marked by its unique uniform and banners, adding a vivid patchwork of colors to the ranks. The logistical effort to supply and maintain such a massive force was unprecedented, involving extensive networks of supply wagons, vast quantities of food, and a continuous trail of support staff and artillery that stretched back to the heart of France. As the army surged eastward, the sheer scale of this operation showcased not just military might, but a deliberate display of power, intended to intimidate and enforce compliance from the Russian Tsar. On June 24, 1812, the Grande Armée crossed the Niemen River, marking the official start of Napoleon's invasion of Russia. As tens of thousands of troops filed across makeshift bridges under the cover of darkness, the enormity of the campaign began to unfold before their eyes. The river crossing was meticulously planned down to the last detail, yet it symbolized the first step into a vast and uncertain territory. Napoleon's confidence was high as he led his troops into Russian lands, spurred by visions of a swift victory that would not only secure his empire's eastern borders, but also firmly assert his dominance over Europe. However, this initial crossing, filled with determination and grandeur, was also the beginning of what would become one of the most grueling and devastating military campaigns in history. As Napoleon's Grande Armée advanced deeper into Russia, they encountered a strategy they were ill-prepared to face. The Russian army, under the skilled command of Generals Barclay de Tolly and later Mikhail Kutuzov, implemented a scorched earth policy, deliberately retreating while burning crops, villages, and resources. This calculated destruction left the French forces bereft of the necessary supplies or shelter, critically stretching their supply lines to dangerous lengths. Despite several tactical victories that showcased their military prowess, the French found little to sustain their massive, sprawling army. Moreover, the Russians also engaged in relentless guerrilla warfare, constantly harassing French units, ambushing them, and effectively cutting off stragglers. As winter approached, the combined effects of scant food and shelter, along with the onset of the harsh Russian winter, began to take a devastating toll on Napoleon's troops, sapping their strength and morale. On September 7, 1812, the Grande Armée faced the Russian forces in the fierce Battle of Borodino, the largest and bloodiest single-day action of the Napoleonic Wars. Just 70 miles west of Moscow, over 250,000 men clashed in a brutal struggle for control. Napoleon's forces, under his direct command, launched wave after wave of relentless assaults against the well-fortified Russian positions. Staunchly led by Marshal Kutuzov, the battlefield was soon enveloped in smoke and the din of combat, as both sides engaged in a desperate fight for supremacy. Despite suffering enormous casualties, with around 30,000 French and 40,000 Russians killed or wounded, neither side achieved a decisive victory. However, the French managed to capture the main positions on the battlefield. This Pyrrhic victory allowed Napoleon to march into Moscow, though it left his army critically weakened and far from defeating the resilient Russian forces. Despite the heavy toll of the Battle of Borodino, Napoleon's weakened army continued to push forward, entering Moscow on September 14, 1812. To their astonishment, they found the city nearly abandoned, a ghostly echo of its former self. The Russian command had strategically ordered a tactical retreat, leaving only a skeleton crew behind who set fires throughout the city. A desperate yet calculated act of defiance. The fires raged for days, destroying large parts of Moscow and further depriving the French forces of much-needed shelter and supplies. This strategic move left Napoleon's army in a dire situation, far from home and without the resources needed for the impending winter. As Napoleon waited in vain for a Russian surrender that would never come, the harsh Russian winter began to set in, compounding the already dire challenges faced by his troops, marking a turning point in the campaign. By October 1812, with Moscow in ruins and no Russian capitulation in sight, Napoleon was forced to order a retreat. The once mighty Grande Armée faced its most harrowing journey yet. As they retreated, the brutal cold, dwindling supplies, and the relentless Russian guerrilla attacks took a severe toll. The temperatures plunged as the army trudged through snow and ice. Starvation and disease decimated the ranks, while skirmishes with Russian forces mercilessly picked off those lagging behind. One of the most devastating moments came as they crossed the Berezina River in late November. Under dire conditions and fierce enemy fire, the crossing resulted in massive casualties, with approximately 25,000 to 30,000 men lost. This retreat was not just a military maneuver, it was a desperate fight for survival, with each step away from Moscow marking a deeper descent into despair and a catastrophic reduction in the army's numbers. The catastrophic retreat from Russia marked a pivotal moment in Napoleon's decline, signaling the crumbling of an empire that had once dominated the European continent. Out of the initial 600,000 men who began the campaign, fewer than 100,000 battled survivors staggered back into Allied territory, a stark testament to the harshness of the Russian winter and the relentless pursuit by Russian forces. The Grande Armée, once feared across Europe, was left shattered, its strength and morale irreparably damaged. The once invincible legions were now a shadow of their former selves, with their defeat sending shockwaves through Europe. This devastating loss emboldened nations previously subdued or hesitant to challenge Napoleon, leading to the formation of new coalitions against him. Nations like Britain, Russia, Prussia, Sweden, Austria, and several German states now saw a new opportunity to curb French influence. The disaster also ignited a wave of nationalism across Europe, particularly in Germany and Russia, catalyzing shifts towards independence and resistance. This newfound spirit of nationalism began reshaping the political landscape, setting the stage for future conflicts and realignments. Ultimately, the Russian campaign significantly weakened Napoleon's grip on power, setting the stage for his eventual abdication and the reshaping of European borders. The fall of Napoleon would usher in a new era of balance and diplomacy in Europe, marked by the Congress of Vienna, which sought to restore old boundaries and reduce the likelihood of such widespread conflict in the future. The Russian campaign of 1812, a monumental endeavor marked by ambition and hubris, stands as a stark lesson in the limits of military power. Napoleon's failed invasion not only shattered his Grande Armée, but also fundamentally altered the course of European history. It demonstrated the devastating effects of underestimating logistical challenges and the harsh realities of war. The resilience of the Russian people and their strategic use of scorched earth tactics redefined guerrilla warfare and inspired nations under the yoke of an empire to rise up. As we reflect on this pivotal chapter, we see how it paved the way for a new era in Europe, one where balance and coalition would become key in maintaining peace and reshaping nations. In the late 18th century, Europe was a continent in turmoil, marked by the upheaval of the French Revolution and the subsequent rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon, a brilliant military strategist and leader, rapidly expanded his influence and control across Europe. By the end of the century, his campaigns had transformed the political landscape. Starting with his stunning victories in Italy, he conquered vast territories, including parts of Austria, the Low Countries, and the Italian peninsula. His bold strategies and relentless ambition turned the French Republic into a dominant European power. The expansion of Napoleon's empire set the stage for his grand ambitions, including his decision to embark on an audacious campaign in Egypt. Understanding this context is crucial to appreciating why Napoleon, at the height of his power, would turn his attention to the distant and ancient land of Egypt. One of Napoleon's primary strategic goals for the Egyptian campaign was to disrupt British trade routes to India. By capturing Egypt, Napoleon aimed to weaken Britain's economic strength by cutting off its crucial trade access to India. This strategic move was intended to cripple Britain's economy, thereby reducing its ability to fund coalitions against France. Additionally, controlling Egypt would provide France with a strategic foothold in the eastern Mediterranean. This would not only bolster French naval power in the region, but also serve as a base for future operations in the Middle East. By establishing a strong presence in Egypt, Napoleon sought to challenge British dominance on the high seas and assert French influence in a region of immense geopolitical importance. By capturing Egypt, Napoleon sought to turn the region into a French stronghold, controlling the passage to the east and asserting dominance over the Mediterranean. Egypt was seen as a land of immense potential wealth and resources. Napoleon believed that by controlling Egypt, France could open new economic opportunities, including lucrative trade routes and access to valuable resources. Napoleon envisioned Egypt as a key economic asset that would strengthen France's economy and reduce reliance on European resources. Expanding French influence was a key objective for Napoleon. By establishing a stronghold in Egypt, he aimed to extend French power beyond Europe and into the Middle East, a region of immense strategic importance. Napoleon's move into Egypt was also a preemptive strike against the Ottoman Empire, which controlled the region. This would weaken the Ottomans and prevent them from threatening French interests. By controlling Egypt, Napoleon sought to project French power, counter British influence, and reshape the political landscape of the region in favor of France. Napoleon's ambition and quest for personal glory played a significant role in his decision to invade Egypt. He saw the campaign as a way to enhance his reputation and achieve military greatness on an international stage. Napoleon was also inspired by the Enlightenment ideals of scientific exploration. He brought along scholars and scientists to study Egypt's ancient culture, aiming to contribute to French and European knowledge. The allure of ancient Egypt, with its rich history and magnificent monuments, fascinated Napoleon and many Europeans. Conquering Egypt connected France to this ancient civilization, enhancing its cultural heritage. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt began with meticulous planning. He assembled a fleet and a formidable army of around 35,000 soldiers, accompanied by over 150 scientists, engineers, and scholars. This grand expedition set sail from Toulon, France, on May the 19th, 1798. The fleet traveled across the Mediterranean, avoiding the British Royal Navy commanded by Admiral Horatio Nelson, which was actively patrolling the waters. Despite an unexpected stop in Sardinia due to adverse weather and supply issues, Napoleon's strategic navigation led them to Malta. When the Knights of Malta refused Napoleon's request to land and resupply, he decided to attack, capturing the island and securing a vital stronghold. After securing Malta, the fleet continued its journey towards Egypt, eventually landing in Alexandria on July 1, 1798. The arrival marked the beginning of the campaign, as Napoleon's forces quickly moved to secure key positions in the city. Napoleon's swift movements in Egypt were crucial for establishing a strong foothold. He aimed to secure Alexandria and quickly move inland to Cairo, engaging local forces and consolidating French control over key strategic points. Upon landing in Alexandria on July 1, 1798, Napoleon's first objective was to secure the city and establish a base for further operations. The French forces quickly moved to take control of Alexandria's key positions, encountering minimal resistance. This swift takeover allowed Napoleon to plan his advance towards Cairo. Marching through the harsh desert conditions, Napoleon's forces encountered the Mamluks, the ruling military caste of Egypt, led by Murad Bey. The decisive Battle of the Pyramids on July 21, 1798, showcased Napoleon's military genius. Using the divisional square tactic, the French defeated the numerically superior Mamluk forces, securing a critical victory. The victory at the Battle of the Pyramids not only solidified French control over Cairo, but also demoralized the Mamluk forces, leading to the rapid collapse of their resistance. Napoleon's entry into Cairo was marked by both celebration and strategic fortification. However, the French occupation of Cairo was soon challenged by the British naval victory at the Battle of the Nile on August 1, 1798. Admiral Horatio Nelson's fleet destroyed the French fleet anchored in Abu Qir Bay, cutting off Napoleon's supply lines and trapping his army in Egypt. Despite being cut off, Napoleon continued his campaigns in Egypt, aiming to consolidate control and fend off Ottoman counterattacks. He marched towards the port city of Jaffa, securing it after a brief but brutal siege, and then proceeded to advance towards Syria. Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, marked by rapid military movements and strategic brilliance, faced significant challenges due to isolation and continuous threats from the Ottoman Empire and British forces. Yet, it highlighted his tactical prowess and ambition to extend French influence far beyond Europe. One unique aspect of Napoleon's Egyptian campaign was the inclusion of the Commission des Sciences et des Arts, a group of over 150 scientists, engineers, and scholars. Inspired by Enlightenment ideals, they aimed to document and study Egypt's rich history, culture, and natural resources. This scientific expedition embarked on a comprehensive exploration, cataloging ancient monuments, studying the flora and fauna, and examining the Nile's irrigation systems. Their most significant discovery was the Rosetta Stone in 1799, which became key to deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. This artifact unlocked the secrets of an ancient civilization and was a major milestone in Egyptology. The findings were later published in a multi-volume Description de l'Égypte, profoundly influencing European knowledge and interest in Egypt. Napoleon's integration of scientific exploration with military conquest demonstrated his ambition to advance human knowledge alongside French dominance. Despite the initial successes, Napoleon's campaign in Egypt faced significant challenges. The harsh desert environment, disease, and supply shortages strained the French forces. Additionally, the local population's resistance and continuous Ottoman and British threats compounded the difficulties. The most significant setbacks was the British naval victory at the Battle of the Nile. Admiral Horatio Nelson's fleet destroyed the French fleet, cutting off Napoleon's supply lines and trapping his army in Egypt. Isolated and with dwindling resources, Napoleon decided to march towards Syria in early 1799 to preempt an Ottoman attack. However, the campaign was met with fierce resistance, particularly at the Siege of Acre, where Napoleon's forces were unable to breach the city's defenses. After failing to capture Acre, Napoleon returned to Egypt, facing an increasingly untenable situation. The combination of military setbacks, disease, and supply issues forced him to consider the viability of maintaining French presence in Egypt. Realizing the strategic impossibility of holding Egypt, Napoleon left his army in the command of General Jean-Baptiste Kleber and secretly returned to France in August 1799. His departure marked the end of his Egyptian adventure and the beginning of his focus on consolidating power in Europe. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, though fraught with challenges and ultimate retreat, showcased his ambition and strategic thinking. It also left a lasting impact on both French military history and European knowledge of ancient Egypt. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, driven by a mix of strategic, economic, political, and personal motives, remains a significant chapter in history. Although ultimately unsuccessful, it showcased Napoleon's ambition and military prowess. The expedition's scientific contributions, including the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, enriched European knowledge of ancient Egypt. Despite facing immense challenges and eventual retreat, the campaign left a lasting impact on both French military history and European cultural heritage. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more fascinating stories from our past.